Well, hello, and welcome everyone to our second week of ethics. I hope that everybody is enjoying the class. I hope you are finding the topics interesting and also applicable and rewarding as we did in the first week. This week we have a pretty packed lecture, which I'll try to shorten as much as I can. And so let's get started. Okay, let's get started on this week's discussion. So before we get into the week's topics and the assignments and such, I wanted to just very briefly mention the American Society of Public Administrators, ASPA, and the American Society for Public Administration is our discipline's body that where we as public administrators, mostly practitioners, but also academics, join and we discuss the themes of the day, the problems, the issues of the day, what sort of solutions does government offer, what are some of the synergies that the practitioners and academics can find to help us deal with the problems that society faces, right? So this is our professional organization, and I would encourage you to seek out the chapter on ASPA, because most universities have a chapter, and to seek it out and to join. And it has a fee, but it really is nice. You can network, you can learn, you have opportunities for exposure, and you never know. Maybe you never know. Maybe you can even find a job. So you never know what kind of networking opportunities are out there. And ASPA is a great place to be linked with our fellow public administration individuals, right? Our colleagues and such. And in terms of ethics, which is the point of this class, it's all about how to become how to promote the idea of the public servant, right? That's what we are at the end of the day, is public servants. And public service is inherently an exercise in ethics. And so it's important that we understand and that we are exposed to ethics from a practitioner's perspective, and ASPA is a great place for us to achieve that. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that in here before we started. All right, so for week two's readings, for this week we have chapter 3 and chapter 4. Okay, so let's talk about chapter 3 very quickly. Here we are going to redefine the sense of duty. Chapter 3 talks about the responsibilities of public administrators, and this issue of agency, right? The importance of agency. Agency is all about us, about the individual and actions. Duty-based approach to ethics. Duty-based is all about Kantian ethics, okay? That we have a sense of duty as public administrators. It discusses personal integrity, put the public interest over personal or organizational interest. This is Fayol, okay? Things like commitment to procedural fairness, Max Weber, all right? So these are some of the topics that Chapter 3 discusses. Chapter 4 is about reinforcing and enlarging this concept of duty. And here in this chapter, we look at, for example, the ethics triangle. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes in this discussion, which is basically the ethics triangle illustrates the relationship between virtue, principles, and consequences. Okay, and we'll look at Chapter 4 discusses these great ethical theorists, Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill. Kant, of course, categorical imperatives is discussed, and we'll talk about them here in a minute. John Stuart Mill is all about utilitarianism. Of course, Jeremy Bentham also is a theorist that is responsible for this concept of utilitarianism. And then we'll discuss the ethics triangle, okay, which is, of course, discussed in Chapter 4. So let's look at some of these concepts that are discussed in this week. Okay, we have a video in this week that you are going to watch, and this video is the Immanuel Kant video. Okay, and the general idea or the general perspective of Kantian ethics is that Kant believed that morality was a constant. Okay, and he believed that things were moral today, tomorrow, 1,000 years from now, and in any setting. Okay, if something was moral, it was moral regardless and no matter what. Okay, he proposed this concept of the hypothetical imperative. Okay, which is based on a desire, an outcome, not on morality. So, for example, if we say that we want to achieve something, we should do something, right? If we want to get good grades, we should study. If we want to succeed in life, we should follow certain rules, right? If we want to, get a position, get a promotion, we need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get that promotion. So this is this idea of a hypothetical imperative, okay, based on these hypotheticals. But what Kant suggested was that this other concept called categorical imperative, okay? And I say here, remember to use flashcards as you are studying these concepts. I know they're dense and they're hard to remember and keep track of. So you might want to create flashcards as to what does Kantian ethics say? What is it based on? And then you do the same thing for utilitarian ethics, and you do the same thing for virtue ethics, okay? So categorical imperative, okay? These are commands you must follow regardless of your desires. So even if you want to be a successful person, whatever you have to do has to follow certain commands, okay? You cannot get away from those lines, okay? Regardless of how bad you want something, regardless of how much you want something, you cannot step over people or do certain things in order to get them or to get that objective, right? So, and how you go about doing this has to do with moral obligations. Kant believed that we are obligated based on a sense of duty to follow certain ways of doing things. And these are not derived from God. These are not derived from the church. These are derived from pure reason, okay? And the way that we know something is right is based on knowledge, okay? By just using our intellect, we are able to derive or decipher whether something is good or bad, and necessarily then whether something is ethical or not. So this is what the video on Kant speaks about. Then we have the video that, or the in comparison, not a video, but the utilitarianism video is looks at utilitarianism, and of course the two great philosophers that promoted or proposed this idea, this concept of utilitarianism and utilitarian ethics are Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, the great economist and philosopher John Stuart Mill. Okay, and the idea here is, for example, are things good based on whether that we believe them to be good, or are they good because of the consequences that come about from our actions? Okay? For example, is killing always wrong? Think about that for a minute. Is killing always wrong? All right? Think about what would divine command theory say. What about natural law theory or Kantian? Kant, what would Immanuel Kant say about that? Is killing always wrong? Okay? And of course, we, based on what lens we put on, if you think about a lens as putting on these glasses, right? You put on this lens, depending on the lens that you put in front of your eyes, will determine the answer to that, okay? Utilitarianism is a moral theory that focuses on the results of consequences of actions and treats these intentions as relevant. So good consequences equals good actions, which mean that if an act produces something that produces a great good, or produces something that's better for more people, then it's considered ethical. This principle of utility is embedded in utilitarianism, and it's based on this idea of an act that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Of course, in at face value, we might say, well, that's not so bad. What's best for all? What's better for the majority? But think about, just for a minute, think about, for example, the United States of America, our country. Think about if government were to apply this philosophy, a utilitarian approach to law, or a utilitarian approach to how society should be built, and what kind of things should be legal or illegal, and what action should the government take. If we applied a utilitarian perspective of the greatest good for the greatest number, then how do we reconcile this with, for example, the 14th Amendment and the rights of the minority? I mean, if 51% wants to kill the other 49%, it is the greatest good for the greatest number, isn't it? Right? Of course, that would be absurd, right? And so we begin to see that utilitarianism, while it seems to make logical sense, and at face value, it seems like it's something that we want, you begin to see how it can really go into some very dangerous, down a very dangerous slope, if you only think about it as your moral compass, if you will, for determining whether an action is ethical or not. So this is utilitarianism. Then we have contractarianism, okay? And this is the Hobbesian approach, and it's built on this idea that morality does not come from the divine, and it is not natural. So it comes from this idea of something is ethical or moral is based on whether it's driven by freedom, whether an actions are free, they are rational, they are guided by self-interest or self-interested people, and when these individuals realize the benefits of doing things right, of cooperating, for example, rather than not cooperating, then you find reason and logic. And of course, these are the actions that, according to contractarianism, lead to an ethical result. Okay, so right acts are those that do not violate the free, rational agreements that we've made. Okay, that's the principle here under contractarianism. And I note here the prisoner's dilemma. If you haven't had a chance to get associated with the prisoner's dilemma, to get familiarized, I should say, with the prisoner's dilemma, Google it, go to YouTube, and find out the prisoner's dilemma and see what it is. And basically, the prisoner's dilemma is this concept we use in economics and in social sciences that tells that basically has two prisoners. You have two prisoners or two individuals that were caught stealing, and they are taken to a police station and they're put in two separate rooms, and they are put into separate rooms. They don't have an opportunity to discuss what their answer is going to be, and the cops will ask them about the crime, and the cops will tell each of them separately that their partner has already confessed to the crime, and if they don't confess, their partner will go home scot-free, and they will get 20 years in jail, as opposed to 3 years in jail if they confess. And the same thing is the same scenario is presented to the other person. Well, at the end of the day, the prisoner's dilemma will tell you that the best possible outcome is unattainable because both individuals will seek their self-interest to reduce that prison time, and they will both end up confessing. That becomes the dominant strategy for both, because they only are able to compare between 3 years in jail versus 20 years in jail, and they are not sure, they cannot for certain say that the other person is not going to confess, and they have to take what the cop is telling them as being true, right? They cannot say to the cop, well, I don't believe you, I don't think my partner is gonna confess, and I'm not going to confess because I'm sure he didn't confess. That is not rational behavior. Rational behavior is looking at what is in front of you and what you know and can control, and so the prisoners end up confessing because that seems to be the right thing to do, because it's the rational thing to do, and it's guided by your self-interest. And so the prisoner's dilemma kind of illustrates this idea, this concept of contractarianism. It's basically saying that contracts and agreeing and abiding into contracts is preferred to not, because this leads to more ethical results. Okay? Then we have the concept of virtue theory or virtue ethics, and this is Aristotle. And Aristotle's view of ethics was that it was all about the individual and an individual's character. For example, if you were a good person, you would normally do good things, okay? Become a good person and you'll do good things, okay? Because Aristotle believed that goodness or virtue was built into us, okay? This desire for us to be virtuous was already built into human beings. Now, you might be thinking like I am thinking at this moment, is like, well, wait a minute, I meet a lot of people that are not virtuous in the world, right? And there are a lot of people that are not good people in the world. So, how is it that virtue is built into us? Because I certainly don't see it, with some of the people that I've run into and some of the things that I see in the news, etc. Right? But let's just, for the sake of argument, take Aristotle's idea that virtue is built into us. Okay, all right. But then we ask the necessary question: what are virtues? All right. What are virtues? I mean, and what makes us virtuous? What drives these virtues? What creates virtues in us? All right. And so doing the right thing at the right time in the right way, okay, in the right amount towards the right people. Think about all of these things. So doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, in the right amount towards the right people. You begin to see how these axioms can be applied to our decisions as public servants, as individuals that work in the public sector, right? We make decisions for the polity, for people, if we are social servants, right? If we're social servants, if we are working, for example, we are working police, right? How we handle a case, how we handle a situation, a traffic stop, etc., right? And you think about how much of ethics goes into these actions and especially now, right? We have body cams and all of the issues that we're very aware of, right? How the necessity of being a virtuous individual and of implementing and applying virtue at all times becomes so important as a public servant. Okay, so this is Aristotle. Now, you take Aristotle, you take Kant, and you take contractarianism from Hobbes, and you take utilitarianism. You kind of put all these together and say, okay, how do I make sense of all of these, and how can I bundle them up into a tool that I can apply and use in a much simpler way, right? Because I don't know about you, but I find it hard to keep these separate and memorize, remember these. So one tool that we can use that we can use to apply ethics in our daily lives and in our decisions is this ethics triangle principle. And this ethics triangle, and there's a video on this. It is basically telling us that if we, the way we approach a decision, the way we approach a scenario, we should approach it by taking into account principles, consequences, and virtues. Okay, so our duties, our actions should be a marriage, should incorporate, should triangulate all of these three forces and dimensions into our decision. Meaning, it's not sufficient just to say, well, if the end justifies the mean, we should do this, right? If the ends justify the means. So the consequences are going to be good, so it doesn't matter who we run over. No, because fairness and principles like justice say, wait a minute, the ends don't justify the means. And then, of course, if the ends justify the means and we're doing things right, okay, then what about character? How does intuition, okay, how does this play in? Or if we are good people, right? If we are good people, is that sufficient for an action to be considered good and ethical, right? If we are doing things by following virtue, is that sufficient? And the answer is no, because we also have to look at the consequences, right? There's a saying that one of my professors used to tell me, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay, and good intentions are not sufficient. And virtue ethics will tell you that, my intentions were great, but I ended up at the end hurting more people. So you also have to take into account the practicality of the decision. It's not just I meant well, but in the end I destroyed the town. No, you have to say I meant well, but I also have to take into account consequences. Okay? And so this interrelationship between principles, consequences, and virtue, somewhere in the middle we will find the public interest at hand. And that's where our duty should be focused on, is how do we protect, not only maximize, but protect the public interest in our decisions. All right. Now, for what we have to do for this week, we have a multimedia discussion board due Saturday. Okay. For this one, develop a brief recorded presentation, provide a brief explanation in your own words, please. Don't refer to the notes of the following ethics theories. So St. Thomas Aquinas, Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, and Hobbes. And apply two theories to an example in public administration, and then look at virtue theory and answer the question, does virtue theory apply to public administrators? Why or why not? Then you also have a journal assignment, and this is also due Saturday. For this one thing to remember, please type directly into the journal area. Okay, do not upload a Word document. So I need you to use that space for you to write freely, like you were putting into a journal. Okay, I don't want to see Word documents. If you write in a Word document, I'm going to take some points off. All right, so please make sure that you do not upload a Word document. So for this journal entry, divide into two sections. How do the theories covered in the videos apply or do not apply in your personal life? Provide some depth of theory, right? Along with some strong rationale for the analysis. And then the second one is explore whether the theories that apply to your personal life are similar or different to the ethics you use as a public administrator. Okay, how are they the same? How are they different? Okay, all right, and then last but not least, uh, I wish you a great week. I hope that you enjoy this week's readings and this week's concepts and the videos, which are very, very cool, very, very interesting. And do unto others as you would like them do to you. Right? That's basically one of the lessons that we learn from from God, right, and from Christianity, at least Christian ethics, is we should behave and treat others in the way that we want to be treated, right? Um, but also we have laws too. As Christians, we are bound by a code. We are bound by certain laws and expectations that we have to live by, right? Thou shalt not murder, the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Covet thy neighbor's wife. Covet thy neighbor's house. Okay? These are laws that are embedded in our Christian ethics. But you see that it's not just Christian ethics. If you look at other ethical perspectives and lenses, you see that they also incorporate them, and they also promote some of these as well. Okay? All right. God bless you. Have a great week and enjoy this week's lessons, this week's topics, and have a great week. Thank you very much.